Lunar Swirl. Originally, I had the idea that Lunar Swirl could create some kind of lunar storm, but then I got myself caught in a bit of a rabbit hole. I started looking at real-life storm science, and started creating an effect that would allow Pyro and Cryo to get mixed into the system. The idea, overall, started to feel less like Lunar Swirl, but instead of dumping the idea altogether, I turned it into a Pela kit. So for today's episode of Trailblazer 2 Traveler, we're going to explore what Pela's design might look like in Genshin. She'll be working as a Hydro-based support for Hydro, Anemo, but also Pyro and Cryo characters. We're also going to revisit a very old mechanic I introduced to the series, which was my expansion on debuffs. As always, additional info is down below, and captions are available if you need them. Without further ado, let's get started. As I just mentioned, Pela's element is going to be Hydro. I think her color scheme makes sense for this choice, as well as the intended kit design. For her weapon, it would visually be a catalyst. Her weapon is literally this book-shaped tablet that controls the drones, so of course we're leaning towards it. But I just can't do it. I can't bring another Hydro Catalyst user into the world. We have too many Hydro Catalyst users. I can't do it to Pela. So, I am making her a bow user. Her attack animations will still be Catalyst-like, at least. Pela won't directly use a bow. She'll use her tablet to summon drones that fire physical damage shots by default. And her aiming animation will have a similar visual to Citlali. Not holding a bow, but still being able to aim an elemental shot. But attack animations aren't that important. After all, she's an off-field support. For her skill, it's originally able to remove an enemy buff. I'm not really gonna focus on the dispelling buff side for this series. While enemies can enter buff states, there aren't too many enemies that directly buff their own stats, so I don't really feel the need to expand on that side of the mechanic. So unfortunately for Pela, her skill in this TDT version is just a quick damage and particle bot. She'll summon a drone that deals 3 quick instances of Hydro damage in a small AoE. She'll generate 4 Hydro particles, and ICD will be a one-time hit. That's honestly all she does for that skill. Her burst will be the main source of damage, application, and utility. When she casts it, she'll summon 3 barometric drones that occasionally deal Hydro damage to nearby enemies. They'll prioritize the enemy that the active character is targeting, and hits will trigger the exposed effect, which reduces that enemy's defense for 5 seconds. In HSR, the defense scaling is like 40%. Because Pela's gonna have other utility in this version, I would realistically lower that scaling. The barometric drones don't just deal Hydro damage. By default, they will also have the wet status applied to them. But for every Pyro or Cryo member present, 1 barometric drone will be converted to have an elemental aura of the corresponding element. With that being said, even though these drones have different elemental auras, they will still deal Hydro damage. The burst cost is 70 with an 18-second cooldown. So doing damage is straightforward, but how does the elemental aura stuff work with a barometric drone? When I was designing Pela's kit, I already had it in mind that she would function as a support for Hydro, Anemo, Pyro, and Cryo. Her kit is based on Lunar Swirl, which relies on Hydro swirling. So I kinda played around with that idea. Swirling in a freeze team is pretty easy. You can get uptime on Hydro and Cryo swirls for various buffs and debuffs. But in a vaporized team, getting uptime on both requires some finesse. This is where double swirls come into play. An example rotation is Kazuha with Bennett and a Hydro unit. You have Hydro on an enemy and a Bennett circle active. Bennett's circle self-applies Pyro on the active character. So when Kazuha uses his skill, he swirls the Hydro aura on the enemy, and then plunges down. His plunge attack will infuse with his self-Pyro aura, which creates a Pyro swirl. Another example is Guoba swirling. This method is kinda what Pela's burst is based on. Whenever Xiangling's Guoba has this little exclamation point, it also has a hidden Pyro aura on it. So if you have a Hydro-affected enemy and swirl at just the right time, you'll swirl Hydro from the enemy, and swirl Pyro off Guoba, creating the same double swirl effect. In this example, you can see it here with the Pyro and Hydro Res Shreds both going down at once. So going back to Pela's Burst, it's like having access to a streamlined version of Guoba Swirl. The elemental auras for Pyro, Hydro, or Cryo are always active, so you don't have to time the swirls. It also gives your Anemo units more flexibility in scenarios that might prevent double swirling. The elemental aura conversions occur per Pyro or Cryo party member, so having an Anemo unit on board guarantees at least one drone stays as Hydro. Next is the A1 passive, which further incentivizes bringing Swirl. While the barometric drones are active, triggering Vaporize, Frozen, Pyro Swirl, Hydro Swirl, or Cryo Swirl will inflict a stack of humidity on the enemy. When enemies affected by humidity are hit with Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Anemo damage, the base damage is further increased multiplicatively. Each enemy can have at most 8 humidity stacks at a time, with each stack lasting for 5 seconds and having independent durations. Vaporize and Frozen can only apply a stack at most once every 1 second per enemy, but Pyro Swirl, Hydro Swirl, and Cryo Swirl can apply at most 3 stacks every 1 second per enemy, but this cooldown is shared amongst all Swirl variants. By the way, you like the new variants I have for the different Swirl combos? Here, I can show you Electro so it won't get left out of the video. Anyway, Pela is still capable of functioning in those teams that run a dual element comp. For example, Skirk teams that rely purely on Hydro and Cryo characters. But with this passive, she won't be as strong, because uptime on the full bonus is impossible to obtain. Because of the hard cooldown limit, even if you perfectly time your freeze triggers, you can only have a max of 5 stacks at a time, but realistically, you're probably getting an average of 4 stacks. Same goes for Vaporize with a pure Pyro and Hydro team. Pela's drones not only have a double swirl synergy, but her A1 also gives Anemo units a leg up in that department. The only way you can maximize stacks is by bringing Anemo characters. With Swirl, not only can it trigger 3 times every second, you can take advantage of another mechanic. Swirl hits have AoE. If you have 3 drones on an enemy and you swirl on all entities, you create 4 stacks at once, a max of 3 swirls off the drone/enemy, but you can also trigger Vaporize or Freeze on the enemy to create a 4th stack. I also need to clarify this. There's a damage limit for swirls. An enemy can only take 2 instances of swirl damage every half second, but the key word is damage. They can absolutely still be affected by multiple swirl hits. In other words, this damage limit doesn't affect your stack generation for humidity. Being able to trigger up to 3 swirls at a time will also allow Varka teams to max out the bonus, even if his teams are locked behind the dual comp of Hydro and Anemo. For Pela's A4, she'll gain different effects with her various barometric drones. If the drone is in its default Hydro state, dealing damage regenerates some energy for herself, and this can occur once every 5 seconds. If the drone is in Pyro, the attack speed is increased. If the drone is in Cryo, dealing damage grants Pela an attack bonus for 4 seconds. All of the utility tied to different drones is tailored to the specific teams Pela runs in. If you run her expected Vaporize or Freeze teams, chances are she's a solo Hydro unit, but you'll have an Anemo character present. That means at least one drone will be Hydro, and this can be a battery to help with ER needs. This should be consistent among all of her teams, so she should have a consistent source of energy. Cryo's easier to explain, so I'll jump to that first. Unlike Pyro teams, Cryo doesn't have as much attack bonuses readily available, so the attack buff she gets from her A4 will compensate for that, and that way she can deal similar damage as a result. Finally, the Pyro teams with Vaporize. In addition to an Anemo character being able to double swirl, the Pyro teams do have a bit of a risk involved. In this team, I have Arlecchino dishing out Pyro damage, and I have Kazuha absorbing Pyro in his burst. In order to allow your Pyro carry to be the one vaping, you need a lot of Hydro application. Pela's faster drone hits with Pyro aren't just meant to deal more damage, it's also there to apply faster Hydro and maintain an aura on the enemy. Now that I've covered the overall kit design, I want to run through the design philosophy, because my brain went into the really sciencey part of the world. When I was writing down my Lunar Swirl concept, I had the idea of it being like a storm or like rainy weather. Enemies within the storm get humidity applied to them. In real life, humid air is very moist, and that moisture sticks to your skin and you feel wet. And not the wet that feels good. I interpreted this sensitivity to moisture and air as being some kind of debuff against hydro and anemo damage. But humidity also makes you sensitive to temperature. You ever walk outside on a hot, humid day? It fucking sucks. Now, I'm not used to cold humidity, but based on the research I did, moisture on your skin can draw out body heat, making you more sensitive to colder temperatures. And that's how I came up with the mechanic, that humidity also makes enemies weaker to pyro and cryo damage. I also want to bring up why Electro was excluded from the kit design. For anyone who doesn't know, humidity is capable of affecting lightning in a storm, so there's room to say that Pela's kit could have incorporated an Electro buff as well, but when I designed the kit, I honed in on the idea that humidity is a debuff. I focused on how it affects people, not the overall environment. Humidity makes us sensitive to air, moisture, and temperature, but in day-to-day life, we don't associate high humidity making us sensitive to electricity. In terms of game mechanics, the need to double swirl on Electro and Hydro is unnecessary. The Electrocharge aura is a coexistence of the two elements, and swirling Electrocharge is able to double swirl already, so Pela's additional drones don't provide that much swirling utility with Electro. Something I also found to be a fun coincidence is that while Pela is able to support freeze comps, she's more of a side grade there, and it might not cross your mind to play her in those teams. Conversely, she will be a really nice upgrade for Vaporize teams, and this team building mindset kinda reflects real life. While humidity can make us more sensitive to cold temperatures, I feel like people mostly bring it up when it comes to hot weather. If any of you have experiences with cold humidity, please share that down below. I'm actually kinda curious to know what it's like. But now that I've yapped on the real life science, this is actually a good segue to the team section. Pela is meant to buff 4 elements: Hydro, Anemo, Pyro, and Cryo. So you have a pretty decent amount of options to slot her in. She inflicts Defense Shred and an effect that increases base damage. And we'll get into this later in the builds, but I have a custom signature weapon and a custom artifact set. So she'll be providing a lot of utility for the team. I'm just gonna go down the list of possible DPS characters who could make use of Pela. In basically all of her teams, maximizing the humidity stacks requires an Anemo unit with consistent swirling potential over time. Every off-fielder except for Lanyan has that, but the best units will be Sucrose and Kazuha because of their buffing potential. Starting with Hydro units, Pela can fill in for Furina in a Neuvillette team. It has the same effect where his A1 can only generate 2 Draconic stacks, but Pela's A1 will compensate for that loss. The 4th slot can honestly be any kind of flex, with Pyro and Cryo being the best options to benefit from Pela. Ayato and Child are both units who work more as driver DPSs, not triggers. So Pela can be run since extra Hydro application doesn't affect them as badly. And then, while off-fielders like Xingqiu, Yelan, or Furina could be replaced by Pela, they can also be paired with Pela since the base damage passive is team-wide. I think the only Hydro unit with straight-up anti-synergy is Mualani. She needs to trigger Vaporize, but Pela would go against that because Pyro units make her application faster. For Anemo units, you have basic DPSs like Xiao, Wanderer, or Hexerai Venti. You also have Chaska who can take advantage of the other elemental bonuses. If you have a Vape or Freeze or even a Rainbow team, all of her Anemo, Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo damage gets boosted from the humidity stacks. And now we have Varka. Varka's interesting, because while Pela is a good unit for him, he isn't actually getting as much value as other units will. Varka already gains a base damage bonus with his A1 passive. This is multiplicative, just like Pela's ability. And when you combine multiplicative base bonuses, these are added up. So if Varka's bonus is a 120% base damage bonus, and Pela provides something like 40%, it's added together to equal 160%. Looking at a unit without base damage buffs, Pela's 40% buff is a straight up 40% increase, but for Varka, the increase is only 18% higher. I do think there's some merit to this mechanic in terms of balancing. On to the next category, we have Cryo. Escoffier brought freeze teams to a point where pure cryo and hydro is the meta, so Pela will be a side grade to these teams. If you bring her in pure freeze, you lock humidity stacks to a max of 4 or 5, and if you bring Anemo, this will reduce Escoffier's A4 res shred. But characters with more generalized builds like Ayaka, Wriothesley, or Ganyu are a bit more flexible with Anemo units. As for Skirk, she runs into the same issues as both Escoffier and Varka. In addition to Pela and Skirk having conflicting base damage stacks based on the present elements, Skirk's A4 bonus is a multiplicative bonus, so her increase in damage won't be as high as the units who don't already have that multiplicative buff. And finally, we have Pyro with Vaporize. This archetype just never got a dedicated support, and because of that, Pela's utility is more akin to a buff for Vape instead of a side grade like with Freeze. A lot of Pyro units were designed to work with it, so all of them benefit from Pela's buffs. Diluc, Hu Tao, Yanfei, Yoimiya, Gaming, Arlecchino, Mawika. Then on the off-fielding side, you have Xiangling and Durin. Compared to Xingqiu and Yelan, who were our best Hydro appliers, Pela now fulfills this role, but also provides higher utility to boost everyone's damage. Because it's team-wide, Pela also works well if you have access to strong off-field damage. Durin Vape with an on-fielder, or maybe Hu Tao's double Hydro with Xingqiu/Yelan, are just a couple examples of this synergy. In summary, I think Pela's strengths lie in her synergy with Anemo units. I don't exactly know how true this is, but I did hear that Anemo was apparently falling off in the meta. Double swirling is also a pretty advanced mechanic that not every player or team comp can pull off. Pela is a unit who makes double swirling much easier in gameplay, and through that enabling, it might be a nice way to reintroduce some Anemo supports back into the meta. Before we move into her builds, I wanted to do a quick overview and recap on my debuff expansion system. The reason being, I'm going to show off a debuff-focused artifact set, as well as the usual signature weapon for Pela. Both of these are going to use a debuff mechanic, so we should cover the details of it. The debuff expansion was a mechanic I introduced in episode 4 of the series with Silverwolf. In HSR, some abilities are reliant on enemies being affected by a debuff, or having stacking effects based on the amount of debuffs on an enemy. When it comes to labeling a debuff, I base it on the source, not the individual effects. For example, Zhongli's Jade Shield creates a res shred effect for all elemental and physical resistance. Technically, this is 8 different effects, but in my debuff mechanic, it's a single source, which is the Jade Shield itself. But through this mechanic, different abilities that provide the same effects can count as different debuffs. Mizuki can run VV, which provides res shred upon triggering Swirl. Her new buffs from this recent version upgraded her C2, which also allow her to res shred. While these two effects are the same stat debuffs, the sources are different. So if a stacking debuff mechanic is in play, Mizuki can contribute 2 sources. While Pela's kit isn't debuff-centric like Silverwolf's was, I want to continue rolling out the system as these episodes come out. Since Pela is a debuffer in HSR, I figured it would be good to expand the mechanic a bit more with her video. The defense shred from her burst is 1 debuff, and her A1's humidity is an effect that's inflicted on enemies, making it a 2nd debuff. Now we can talk about some of Pela's builds. The main stat she needs is energy recharge to burst every rotation, but she's not a support who has specific stat scalings, so once you get enough ER, you can just focus your attention on damage stats. For the main stat pieces, you have ER or attack on the Sands, then Hydro damage or attack on the Goblet, and then crit on the Circlet. For substats, focus on ER, then you can build crit and attack. Because Pela actually builds for damage, her personal output is pretty good. This is especially useful because it makes her own humidity effect much stronger. For her best sets, Emblem of Severed Fate is a really good option, since she needs a lot of energy recharge already. Her barometric drones are part of her burst, so the synergy there is really solid. Aside from that, however, she doesn't really have other options besides the classics like Noblesse. But that's where the new artifact set comes in. If you follow along with my community posts, you may have seen that I started doing small reworks or buffs of older concepts. I figured it was nice to revisit them and fix up some issues. But something else I added was an artifact concept for debuffing. Based on the HSR relic set, Pioneer Diver of Deep Waters. Its 2-piece bonus would increase damage against a debuffed opponent by 15%. For its 4-piece, when the set user applies at least one debuff with their talents, which basically means it can't be a debuff from a weapon, artifact, or reaction, then the enemy affected takes 15% increased crit damage from all sources. For every 3 seconds the debuff stays active, the crit damage increases by another 15%, up to a max of 45%. So essentially, after 6 seconds of the debuff lingering, you can max out the bonus for the entire team. This effect cannot stack with itself, so you can only have one unit running this set in a team. The effect itself is a debuff, but because it needs to be triggered by a character's talent, it can't self-enable its own effect. But in the future, when I introduce more of the debuff system, this artifact set might be able to contribute to future passives. Now, as of this video, I just did a really small tweak to the 2-piece effect. Instead of dealing 15% more damage to debuffed enemies, the effect is now just a 20% energy recharge bonus. In terms of the best units for this set, you only need to apply one debuff that can last for a long period of time. Interestingly, a lot of units have debuff abilities, and also don't have a strong artifact set, so this one becomes their new best option. Mona technically has the Hexerite sets that can be swapped depending on her playstyle, but the debuff set can be a new option for both playstyles, since I personally consider her Omen Mark to be a debuff. Meanwhile, Shenhe's Burst, Faruzan's Burst, and Chevrez's A1 all inflict some form of a Res Shred effect. Escoffier's A4 can proc it as well if you need an alternative to Golden Troop. Lisa has Defense Shred, and then if you run Citlali and Shalon together, one of them can bring Cinder City, while the other can bring the debuff set. Overall, this set is really flexible on a lot of older characters, especially ones who didn't have a good set to begin with. Moving on to weapons, Pela's a bow user purely because I didn't want her to be another Hydro Catalyst. For free options, Chainbreaker is a nice attack stat stick. Pela's teams also have her in solo Hydro, so she can max out the bonus. Rainbow Serpent's Rainbow provides ER as well as attack when Pela is off-field. Fading Twilight provides ER and a damage bonus. Song of Stillness can work if you have a healer. For the premium choices, Fav and Sackbow both provide good sources of energy. Range Gauge provides good damage sources if you bring a healer. But for more unconditional weapons, Alley Hunter and Moon's Moon provide strong stats as well. Moon's Moon in particular is good because of the energy cost passive converting to damage percent, and Pela herself has a high energy cost. For 5-star choices, Elegy is a good bow for its team-wide attack and EM buff. EM will be better in Vaporize as opposed to Pela's other archetypes. In terms of damage weapons, you have Daybreak Chronicles or Aqua Simulacra. For Pela's signature, I'm keeping it pretty similar to the Light Cone passive. Combining the original name with Pela's barometric-themed kit, I called it Nimbostrat Night Rest. It'll have a 565 base attack and a 30.6% energy recharge substat. When attacking an enemy with a debuff, the user deals 8 to 16% increased damage. This effect can stack up to 3 times, which makes for a 24 to 48% damage bonus. Pela already provides team utility with a defense shred, base damage bonuses, and a crit damage bonus with her kit and artifact set. Because there's so much utility already, I just focused the bow on being a personal damage weapon. Her damage output is pretty good, so this will be a viable choice for her. The 3 pieces of utility I mentioned earlier are also able to contribute individual stacks for this passive, so she has no issues maxing out the bonus. For other users, because the weapon isn't dependent on the user inflicting a debuff, any damage dealer can run this in the right team. For example, I could give this to Linny, and then run an overload team with Chevrez and Durin. Both provide Res Shred, which can grant him 2 stacks. Give it to Child in the original national team. Xiangling C1 gives Res Shred, and Sucrose can VV Shred, so there's also 2 debuffs. Once again, there's no strict users for the bow, it's just reliant on your team building. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. With this kit, Pela brings a lot to the table with her ability to buff older team archetypes that previously included Anemo units. If you're able to slot in a unit for swirling, you can bring a lot of utility for Hydro, Anemo, Pyro, and Cryo characters. And with the meta moving into these dual element comps, I think this is a nice way to bring more variety to the overall roster. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on Pela's kit. What did you like? What would you change? And what other alternative ideas do you have? If you want to share more ideas with our community, consider joining my Discord server. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!